The New York City Council just passed the Living Wages for Musicians Act, 1 cent per stream. Typically, you'll make around $4,000 per million streams on Spotify. But with this new 1 cent per stream royalty, you'll be making $14,000 on average from 1 million streams. This is an entirely new royalty on top of the royalties that they're already paying out that gets paid directly to the artist with no middleman. Now that sounds like a living wage to me. $14,000 a month if you have one song that's doing 1 million streams, or $14,000 a month if you have 10 songs doing 100,000 streams. This makes it so that independent artists can actually survive and live comfortably, only having to do music and not have to go out and get second jobs and bartending gigs to survive. Now, while the New York City Council passing this resolution is more symbolic than anything, what it really is them saying we stand behind this getting signed into federal law. So once the House and the Senate approve this bill and the president signs it into law, that's when this stuff can actually start to take effect for you. That being said, the momentum for this bill to get passed is crazy right now. And I think there's no better time with how the industry is shifting towards independent artists for this thing to actually become a reality. You sharing this video will help spread awareness and help us get this thing past the finish line. So share this with an artist friend, post it on your story, do whatever you gotta do to get the word out, because we are this close to changing things forever and being on the right side of history.
So ladies and gentlemen, something that's kind of flown under the radar the past few weeks was that musicians and fans of musicians who want musicians to make a livable wage off of their art, we all got a decent sized W recently. Not a major W, I'm gonna explain why later, but still a decent sized W, because recently in New York, the New York City Council passed a bill that they referred to, they called it the Living Wage for Musicians Act. And while I don't think this is going to change the world necessarily overnight, this is still something that would be in the positive direction for many artists who want to make a full-time living off their music. So basically, this act would force streaming platforms like Spotify, for example, to increase how much they pay per stream. Right now, platforms like Spotify, they typically pay about roughly 0.04 cents, so less than a penny, like fractions of a penny. Whereas after this bill, it would go up from 0.04 cents to 0.14 cents. So about 1.5 cents more or less, which is literally a 250% increase, which would make it a whole lot easier for a lot of artists to try to make a full-time living making music, or at the very least try to make it a very profitable second job, or I don't want to call it a side hustle because it's people's passion, but it's still like a profitable second job opportunity. Because right now, like in New York, for example, the median price for an apartment is about more or less $3,600, depending on where you're living. Of course, in Manhattan, it's more expensive. Like in Manhattan, the median price is $5,000 a month for a 1-bedroom. But, you know, depending on where you live, it's about more or less $3,600, right? To try to make just enough to pay your rent. We're not going to use New York as an example because it's so expensive, but throughout the rest of the country, what is the median price for a 1-bedroom? Like maybe $1,500 more or less. To make enough to even pay for you to have a place to live, to make that just off of music on platforms like Spotify, you would need to be making them around roughly, you would need to get at least like somewhere around 400,000 to 700,000 streams, somewhere in that ballpark. Whereas if once this new bill becomes the new standard and these streaming platforms increase how much they pay artists for music, instead of having to get that many views, all of a sudden you as an artist may only need to get about roughly 150,000 streams to be able to at the very least pay for your mortgage or your rent, you know, whatever the case may be, pay for you to just have a place to live, right? Obviously, you wouldn't necessarily get rich with that, but that still could go a long way for a lot of people. And it will put a lot of people in a position where even if they still have to work a 9 to 5 job because they're not like super rich, at the very least, they could live a more comfortable lifestyle. Imagine if you, like, if you're like, most artists are working day jobs, but unfortunately most artists can't really maximize their true potential artistically, because when you're working a day job, it's draining so much of your time and energy and motivation. Like, you see a lot of these bullshit motivational speakers that, not, and I don't have nothing against motivational speakers, but some of the things they say kind of get on my nerves, but I don't have a problem with them. But one thing you'll see them say is they'll try to shame people and say like, "Oh, well, you're only working at your job for 8 hours. You have 16 more hours to go make something happen." And it's like, well, it's not really that simple. That the average commute in America, for example, is about roughly 26 to 30 minutes to get to your job, and then 26 to 30 minutes obviously to get back from your job. Even though that's technically not on the clock, that's still time you're dedicating towards that job. Not, and also not to mention, if you the time you spend getting up in the morning, getting, taking a shower, getting dressed, eating some breakfast if you even have time to eat some breakfast. When you're on that job, typically they don't count your lunch break towards those 8 hours. So in reality, you might really be there 9 hours, but you just had an hour lunch break or a 30-minute lunch break that's not being counted. So the point I'm trying to make is the time can go by very quickly. And when you're at a soul crushing, soul destroying job, it's very easy to lose that passion. And this is why a lot of artists, a lot of great artists with massive potential, they can get to a point where they completely lose whatever fire is within them, because if you go through that for so many years and you're still trying to maintain that passion, and you can only go so far before you say, man, I really need to make some money doing this. Otherwise, for many people, it's just not going to be worth it anymore. And I went on that quick tangent just to make the bigger point that a bill like this definitely would matter, because even though it's still going to be difficult for most artists to realistically get 1 million views or 100,000 views or anything like that, it still would become a little easier to try to get 100,000 streams compared to 1 million. And that 100,000 streams can still put artists in a position to where they could have a decent second income coming in that could free up their time, so they're not working a second job, and so they're not wasting time watching stupid videos on YouTube telling you here about, oh my gosh, here's 5 side hustles that can make you $1,000 a day. But in reality, all those videos are bullshit, but people watch it anyway. Like, they're not gonna waste as much time on stressing or worrying about how they're gonna make enough money to try to get by anymore. That could go a long way, obviously. And I'm interested to see if this actually becomes the new standard, because even though New York passed this law, I don't know if that means that everybody has to now follow that. I'm assuming that can be a possibility, of course, because most parts of the country, once one region makes a new standard, especially somewhere as influential as New York, I imagine other regions will follow suit. And something else I wanted to keep in mind for many artists is just continuing to make content outside of the music, which many artists are already doing, obviously. And I think that's the best possible thing most artists can do, is to just keep making more content outside of the music, just to try to see what works, anything, like. And it's not really a place of desperation. I guess you could argue it is, but it's more so a matter of trying to see what else can help you garner a audience. This is why you see artists like Action Bronson doing like a cooking show, because he also before he became a full-time rapper, he was a chef. You see artists who get into a whole bunch of other stuff, like some people will call it side quests, like how you have it in a video game. But even then, like, recording that and making that content, it could go a long way as well. Like, you look at some of these YouTubers who aren't even that big, man. Like, some of these people have like maybe 5 to 10,000 subscribers and they're still making like 100 grand. Like it's very fascinating to me when